So after coming off that bread line, if you've not caught on that, you need to sort of feed some bait, you need to feed some maggots. So if you are catching on bread, I wouldn't feed my peg whatsoever. But we've not caught on bread, there's been no signs on that far bank other than some rudd in front of that reed bed. So I'm not really, with the light fading now and the short hours, I'm not going to spend any time going across fishing in that shallow water, because I feel like the fish are not in the peg. The best chance I've got of catching you a fish is basically spending my time where I think the fish are, which is the deeper water. With your deep water swim though, you sort of fish towards where you think the fish are. I'm not really going to move this line ever. I'm going to try and make the fish come to me. So I'm going to roughly talk you through plumbing up. When we go in and we actually plumb the swim, I want to just make sure that I've got enough line on the bottom so that my rig is not moving. So again, you can see I'm fishing quite far down my peg, 13 metres. It's not quite level with the next peg, but I'm going as far away from myself as possible here. So you can see there, when I plumb up on the body of my float, on the body of my float, I want it just out of the water. So if I go a little bit to the left, you'll see it starts to come up, only by an inch or so, 2 inch, 2 inch, and then it starts to jump. So the shelf's there, I'm coming away from that shelf a little bit, but I'm about 3/4 of the way across the actual canal. So if I keep coming to the right, you'll see it goes a little bit deeper, only by an inch or so. That's like the silty bit, so I'm just at the bottom of that far slope. And that's where I'm going to choose to fish this line, and that there is plumbed up perfect. That's how I want it. I'm about an inch and a bit over depth. By the time I relax my rig, hopefully I'll be about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch over depth. So I know my bait is going to be nice and still on the bottom. So that's where I've chose to fish. When it comes to hooking maggots, there's 2 ways I like to hook maggots. You've 2 options here as well. I like to fish an 18's F1 maggot for the fact that I can fish a single maggot on it and the hook's not too big, and I can also fish double on it. So when I'm fishing single maggot, what I like to do is squeeze the maggot a little bit, and at the fat end, just nick it as lightly as possible. So I don't want to damage the maggot whatsoever. Single maggot sits perfect on an 18's, not too big. If I'm fishing double maggot, what I like to do then is take both maggots and actually hook them through the fin end. This means that I've got more hook points showing. So again, I just squeeze the maggot, hook it through the fin end, take my other one, nick that through the fin end as lightly as possible. I've hooked them so that basically they can't fold back over the hook. Now, if you're hooking the traditional way, both through the fat end, sometimes the maggot will fold back over, mass the hook point, you end up losing fish or bumping fish. So by doing it that way, it just means that you've got more chance of setting that hook when you strike. Some venues single maggot if there's smaller fish or there's some hide knocking about, anything like that. Sometimes single maggot can be a good hook bait as well. But generally, the more maggots you feed, the bigger your hook bait needs to be to stand out against it. So if you're fishing across and tapping 6 or 8 in, single maggot can stand out. You've got a 1 in 6 chance basically. But when you're putting in sort of 20 odd maggots, single maggot can get a little bit lost, a little bit like a needle in a haystack. So I always like to fish with double maggot, a little bit more positive, sometimes catch better stamp fish on it as well. So I'm going to take about 20 odd maggots. Now, if you're shipping a long distance, a good little tip is to dunk your maggots in the water. If you're shipping, say, 6 metres, you can leave them dry, they'll come out of your pot easier. But what I don't want to do at this time of year is spill bait everywhere. So all I'm going to do, dunk my maggots under the water. The holes in the pot will let the water drain out, just makes your maggots sort of stick to your pot a little bit. So it just stops you spilling any bait on the way out there. And like I say, it's a very simple style of fishing. It's all about location. But if the fish are not in your peg, you can't catch them. You've got to go to the fish. So what I'm going to do, line up with my marker, turn my pot round, give it a little tap and just empty all them maggots in one go. Now there's 2 ways of putting your rig in. If there was a lot of fish there, I'd put my rig in, let it straighten, and I could lower my rig down nice and slowly like that. And that'll just lower it in that zone where the fish are, they're coming to your bait, I can get my rig to the bottom. If I feel like the fish are being a little bit cagey and backing off my feed, then the other way of putting my rig in is to flick it past, put your float where you're fishing and have that back shot low, and that stops your float from riding up, and then my rig will settle. As soon as my rig is settled then, so like there now, you can just see my dropper's kicked in, my rig's settled, then I will correct my pole to make sure that I'm above my float and ready to strike. What you don't want to do is feed your bait in one spot, flick your rig out and let your float drift a foot down your peg, because then you're not on your bait. You want to make sure that you're right on your bait. So my trap is set there now. I'm probably going to sit here for sort of 5 or 6 minutes, wait for a bite. If I don't get a bite, the longer I sit there for, the less chance I've got of getting a bite. So after about 5, 6 minutes, I'm going to refeed again. So we'll sit there. We had a little sign on the float then. It could have been a small fish. You know, a lot of rudd knocking about today because there's not many F1s present, but it's something. The second rig I'm going to be using today is obviously my trap rig for fishing down the middle. Again, pink hydro elastic, 015 main line. I've got a little back shot, exactly the same as the cross rig. The float is just a little bit heavier, but exact same float, so 0.45 of a gram this time. Carbon stem still, just for that little bit deeper water, bit heavier float. Moving down the rig, then I've got a bulk. I've actually got cubes on this, and a lot of people wonder whether they should use shot or cubes. When you're fishing in a bulk formation like that, it doesn't really matter. But what does matter is making sure that you've got shot as your droppers. So this one is set a little bit higher, the bulk itself. It's about 20 inches from the hook because it's a little bit deeper. I want a little bit more drop and a bit more fall, so I've moved everything up a little touch. The dropper is a number 10, exactly the same as before. That's about 6 inches from my bulk. And then below that, about another 6 inches, I've got another number 10 dropper. And on this rig, a little bit finer, I've got less chance of hooking a bigger fish. I've got 6 inches of 010 to an 18's F1 Maggot. So a little bit finer hook. And that's just because we can get away with it because we've got less chance of catching carp down the middle than we have across. But again, the rig is virtually identical, the only difference being a slightly heavier float just because we're fishing in deeper water. So as you can see, there's like tons of small fish here, little tiny rudd, stuff like that. This is exactly what we would have had if we fished across as well, and this is just due to lack of better stamped fish being in your peg. This is the problem when you know, not necessarily just come and film, but just when you come and fish in winter in general, the fish will want to back away from you. All I can really do now when it's like this is fish through it, just keep feeding. I'm not worried about feeding at this point, so I'll put 20 maggots in. Hook my net there, just get that out of my net. I'll put 20 maggots in every single chuck because I know there's probably at least 20 rudd eating all them maggots. The worst thing I can do now is stop feeding because I'm never going to feed them off. I don't want to up my feed at any point and try and force them to back away. When the bigger fish come in my peg, if they come in my peg, they will just literally back off them silverfish. So you can see there, I'm just bombing my rig straight down, just let my bulk catch up, bomb it to the bottom, and literally I've been getting a bite, which is not what I'm looking for. You can see there, the rudder straight on it again. Just bump that one. Drop that rig straight back in, nice and quick, get that bait down to the bottom. But this is typical of like how F1s back off in the winter. You know, when you look at how this peg has fished throughout the seasons, you know, the March one was catching on soft pellets across, soft pellets in the edge. The summer one, hard pellets, you know, the fishing was good, fishing with ground bait, being able to target what fish you wanted by fishing further up the slope, catching some bigger carp. If you've watched the previous episodes of the campaign, you know, you'll think, wow, this is totally different. But when the water goes clear, the fish become spooky. And, you know, like I've said all along, location is key. If you're not within reach of them fish, you're going to struggle to catch them. You've got to go to the fish. You can't be lazy and think, well, I'll just sit here at 13 metres. If the fish are topping at sort of 18 metres, you want to get as close to them, 15, 16 metres down your peg. The closer you are to them, the quicker your bites will come. The fish will always want to back off, but at some point during the day, they will have a little bit of a feed, and this track line is probably the best line to get them bites later on in the session. So I've just bumped another little rudd then. They're really, really small fish as well. They're like this year's fry, if you like. So they're a bit of a pain because you bump them as well. No point me going on to single maggot because obviously they'd swallow it up a lot easier. So it's just a case now of fishing through it, and hopefully a little bit of activity, a little bit of bait going through the peg, activity from them rudd as well, you know, darting around your peg. You might get an odd carp or an odd F1 that's inquisitive, you know, and any sort of feeding fish is, you know, likely to draw other fish into your peg as well. So I'm going to keep fishing this line and hopefully we're going to get an F1 or 2 before the end. So let's have a little quick look at pots. The pots itself, medium pots, just different lids, that's the only difference. Now, when you're feeding down the track, what you want to actually do is fill your pot up. You want your bait to come out quite quickly. Obviously in deeper water, we don't want to encourage the fish to come up, so we don't want to be sprinkling as bait in and encouraging them to come up off the bottom where we might foul hook some. So we can ship out there, we've got an open rim on this one and we can literally just tip them in one go, put us rig in and away we go. When it comes to your cross fishing, or if you was fishing down the edge to some cover or anything like that, exact same pot, but different lid on it. So this has got the sprinkle lid on it, we've got 4 little holes in it, just allows us to tap a few maggots out at a time. They don't all empty too quickly. And also with this pot, I put a little bit of tape around it. That's just to stop any sort of holes that are on the side, maggots crawling out of it. So it's a case of filling your pot, not right to the brim. This is really important. You need to leave a little bit of a gap so your maggots can shake about and bounce out of your pot. Otherwise you'll be tapping like a lunatic trying to get them out. Once I shut my lid then, I can go over, tap, tap, tap. However many maggots I want to feed, 4, 5, 6, whatever it may be, 10, I can tap them out, and then once I've got my required amount out of my pot, I'll be watching the water for the maggots hitting the water, and then I can stop. Turn my pot round. If I want to feed another line, I've got some bait in there. But also what this does is it stops them from shipping in every 5 or 6 minutes. I can stay there. If I don't get a bite, turn my pot back over, tap a few more maggots out, get a nice slow release, which means that your bait's falling through at different rates. Hopefully it catches the fish's eye. This is what we call sprinkling, and that's sort of what you call clumping your bait in. So 2 different ways of feeding, 2 different lids to suit, and that's it for sort of winter maggot feeding. So I'll just put them maggots in there now. It's been real frustrating today because I feel like the fish are about 30 metres further up, just sat in that corner, well out of reach. I just don't feel like there's any fish in this area. It's typical of what happens in winter. And I'm getting lots of little signs now from small silverfish, and it's telling me that there's not many big fish present, because as soon as them big fish are present, your bites will stop from the silvers. So it just goes to show how the peg can change so much. Obviously, when we fished in the spring, we was catching down the edge on pellets, across on pellets. We come in the summer, we were catching on hard pellets, fishing in the track, similar to this, fishing closer to ourselves, targeting bigger carp in the margins with ground bait, and then you come in the winter time and you can't get a bite. You know, there's probably about an hour's worth of light left and we've still not caught an F1. Now, it doesn't mean to say that the tactics are wrong, it just means that you sat on the lake on your own, the fish are going to back off. So what I'm going to do now is try and fish this line. I feel like this is my best chance of getting a run of fish. It's the deepest part of my peg, it's where the fish are going to feel the most safe, and if we're going to get a run, this deep water line is normally the best place in winter to spend that last hour of your match. So whenever you come on these canalised lakes, don't be going down the edge last hour, don't be sitting out across. Like, you can sometimes prime this line up or drop onto this deep water line and finish with a flurry of fish. So that's what I'm hopefully going to try and do now, is try and catch fish for the camera. Still getting a few signs from the rud though, so I don't feel like they're just there yet, but I've got to keep putting bait in. If I don't feed, nothing will ever happen. So at the moment, I'm putting 20 odd maggots, keep feeding them 20 odd maggots, knowing that the rud are eating them. Hopefully the rud bites will slow down, the light will drop, some fish will drift into the area, and then we might potentially have a chance of getting a fish. Hey, we've finally got one. So just as I was saying, that light starts to go, you might have a chance of catching a fish. I must admit, I was losing confidence because it's getting quite late now. But if we was ever going to get a bite, it was always going to come from that deep water. Not a massive fish, probably a little stocky F1 or something, but it's a bite. And there's every chance now that we could go back in and potentially catch like another 2 or 3. But we've saved the dreaded blank. There we go, nice little F1. There we go, lovely little F1. I'm going to get my picture of him because I'm not very confident that we might get another. So I'm going to get some stills of this one, but it just shows like you can go all day without a bite and then all of a sudden light drops and you get a bite out of the blue. Totally unexpected, but you know, when we're on more fish, we might start catching there with an hour, hour and a half to go. So I'm going to get a little picture of this one and then we'll get back in and see if we can nick another. After catching that fish then, obviously you don't want to go back in without feeding. Whenever you're fishing for these F1s and carp, you've got to feed something every single chuck. So going back in there now, another 20 odd maggots. If I don't get a bite, I'll wait that 5-6 minute period. If I get a bite any quicker, I'll still feed again next chuck, because hopefully a few of them maggots have been ate. There might still be an odd rud around, but it's looking like I've not had a rud on the drop. So it's looking like hopefully there's not as many there as there was 10-15 minutes ago. That F1 come a little bit out of the blue, but now it's the perfect time of day to be getting a few bites. So make sure that you're constantly keeping that bait dripping through the water. Not all the time, but 5 or 6 minutes, bit of baiting, 5 or 6 minutes, bit of baiting, and there we go, a little indication. Keep that bait going through regular, because if you don't feed, you're never going to attract anything into your peg. So you have to feed something, whether it be 10 maggots, 20 maggots, 50 maggots, whatever it is. Obviously today we're feeding about 20 odd maggots, but the deeper it is, you might end up feeding a little bit more, 30 maggots maybe. There we go. So again, you could just tell the bites from the rud are just slowed up, and all of a sudden it's another better fish again. So 2 fish in 2 chucks after not catching a fish all day, it just shows how much light levels play a part, how fish can just drift into your peg, and it sort of proves that you're not doing nothing wrong. The fish have just not been there. Now they're there, and it's the time of day as well, all of a sudden we're getting some bites. So again, another nice little chunky fish, got a nice little belly on it like me. So we'll stick him back and we'll see if we can go and get one more or two before the end. It's quite unbelievable really. You go all day without a bite, and then my last 3 casts I've had 3 fish, and it just shows that, you know, you can't give up for a start in winter, but also, like I said, you're not doing nothing wrong. It's just time of the day. The fish now want to feed. You know your tactics are right, because all of a sudden you're catching them nice and easy now. If your tactics were wrong, you know, you probably wouldn't catch that late on in the match. You'd probably, you know, if you're fishing the wrong bait or anything like that. It's not that you're fishing the wrong bait. You know, people may be sat there thinking, you know, why not try pellet if you're not catching on maggot? Why not try corn? Or it's just that the fish are not there. Now the fish are there, my rud bites have slowed up, and all of a sudden I'm getting bites off, you know, F1s. So don't give up. That's a big thing in winter. Make sure that you keep feeding every single chuck, even if you start catching. Make sure you put a little bit of bait in. Make sure that you're keeping new fish coming into your peg, keeping bait falling through your swim to try and attract new fish. So again, 20 odd maggots. And now it's just a case of repeating the process, going through the motions. You know, if this was a match situation now, you'd have half an hour left and you'd be thinking, right, see if I can get that little run. So that there, a rud straight away, that's not a good sign, because now we might have had 3 fish and all of a sudden the F1s have backed off. But all I can really do is keep going through the motions now, keep feeding like I was before when these rud was in the peg, and hopefully any fish that are in the area will drift back and you'll start catching again. So there we go, after that little run of rud, that time I fed twice and never had a sign. So I could just tell there was a slightly better fish in my peg. Really lethargic, not moving much. There we go, better one. Biggest one of the day, probably only £2, 2 and a bit pound, but still a nice fish. Probably the last fish of the campaign. I'll just show him to you. So a nice F1. But it's crazy how, you know, we've fished all day and you can't get a bite, and then all of a sudden the light starts to go right near the death. We catch 3 really quick, 10 minutes where we're getting rud again, little quiet spell, we know there's a fish present again, we catch that fish. We could probably go in now and catch another couple maybe to finish off the session, but we're going to call it a day on that. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know the fishing's been hard, but I think it shows you how different the seasons can be. When we come in March, we was catching across up to the reeds on pellets, in the edge on pellets, fishing a little bit off the bank, just looking for that certain depth of water. Summertime, fishing right against the bank, targeting big carp on ground bait, fishing with hard pellets down the centre of the middle, deep water. Today, you're fishing in the deep water again, but you can't get a bite, and that's just typical of winter. The fish back away from you, and some days they just don't. Like today, with a bank that side disturbance, and not just that, you're the only person on the lake, the fish just want to back away. So the light fades, they let the guard down a little bit, they come a little bit closer. If we'd have had a bit of ripple today, they might have drifted to us a little bit closer, you know, a bit earlier, should I say. So all little factors in terms of conditions and stuff like that, they all play a major part. The windier it is, the less effective bread will be, but the more, you know, the more bites you'll probably get on maggots and stuff. So hope you picked a few tips up. If you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe to our channel. It's Tackle Guru TV on YouTube, and we'll have more future content coming out like this. I hope you've learnt something on the campaign. It's been a great series for me. I've really enjoyed filming it. Sadly, it's not been brilliant today, but it was fully expected with the conditions and the weather and stuff. But hopefully there's still some information there to learn from. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.